Imagine, if you will, a really tranquil, almost glassy lake nestled deep in the Alban hills of ancient Italy. The Romans called it Diana's Mirror. Lake Nemi. It's a place known for its quiet beauty, famed for its serene stillness. But here's where that tranquility just shatters. Prowling the sacred grove, sword in hand, was this, well, ghastly priest. He was always on guard, always expecting an attack, because you see, he had murdered his predecessor to get his office, and he knew he himself would eventually be slain. It was this cycle, this brutal recurring tragedy that honestly baffled even the ancients. So, our mission today then is to take a deep dive into this really bizarre custom, this strange rule of the King of the Wood at Nemi. We're going to pull back the curtain on this unique tradition by looking far beyond classical antiquity. The goal? Well, it's to reveal the surprising, almost universal patterns of human thought that might explain such a primal, kind of violent custom.
It's quite remarkable, isn't it? To really get a handle on this single ancient Italian custom, we actually have to cast our net incredibly wide. We're pulling insights from, well, diverse cultures across the globe to reveal the underlying human beliefs that might connect to it. And our core source material for this deep dive comes from excerpts of the Golden Bough, a truly foundational work that really illuminates these kinds of mysteries.
Okay, so let's really set the scene for this enigma at Nemi. Lake Nemi, with its calm waters, it's stunning. J.M.W. Turner even captured its sort of dreamlike quality in his painting, The Golden Bough. On the northern shore, right under the cliffs where the modern village of Nemi sits today, was the sacred grove of Diana Nemorensis, or Diana of the Wood. This was the domain of the Rex Nemorensis, the King of the Wood. And this wasn't just a title, it described his entire existence. A priest, yes, but also a murderer, always with a drawn sword, perpetually anticipating the one who would come to slay him and, take his place.
Yeah, and what's so striking here is that this brutal rule of succession, where you hold office only until you are slain by a stronger or maybe craftier challenger, it apparently had no parallel in classical antiquity. Our source describes it as savoring of a barbarous age that somehow survived right into imperial times, like a primeval rock rising from the smooth-shaven lawn.
Hmm.
Its very archaic nature gives us this unique window into older, more primitive forms of thought that might help explain it.
And this brings us to the famous Golden Bough itself. The rules stated that only a runaway slave was allowed to break off a bough from a certain sacred tree in the grove. If he succeeded, he then had the right to challenge the priest to single combat. If he slew him, he became the new king of the wood. It sounds like something straight out of a myth, really.
And in fact, legend did connect this fateful branch to the very golden bough that Aeneas plucked at the Sibyl's bidding before his perilous journey to the underworld. There's also a tradition that the slave's desperate flight mirrored the mythical flight of Orestes, and the combat itself was a distant echo, maybe, of human sacrifices once offered to the Tauric Diana, whose image Orestes supposedly brought to Italy. This custom was so deeply ingrained that even Emperor Caligula, feeling the current priest had held office maybe a bit too long, hired a stalwart ruffian to slay him, which really underscores its persistence even into, civilized Roman times.
Right, so Diana was clearly a powerful figure here, but who exactly was Diana Nemorensis and what was her worship like at this specific site? Two main features seem to stand out. First, she had this very special, almost maternal role for women. Votive offerings found at the site show she was worshipped by those desirous of children or of an easy delivery. A very personal connection there.
hmm And second, fire played a very prominent part in her ritual. Her annual festival, celebrated during the hottest time of the year, saw the grove just lit up by a multitude of torches, their ruddy glare reflected in the still waters of the lake. Throughout Italy, this day was observed with holy rites at every domestic hearth. Women whose prayers had been answered by the goddess even brought lighted torches to the grove in fulfillment of their vows. And the title Vesta, that she sometimes had, strongly suggests the maintenance of a perpetual holy fire in her sanctuary.
So Diana was clearly powerful, deeply linked to creation and transformation, with fire as this central element. Did her worship involve other specific, maybe unique rituals beyond those, grand torchlit festivals?
It did, yeah.
Yeah.
The festivals also involved young people undergoing purification rites, dogs being crowned, which is quite a visual, isn't it? And a feast of young kid, wine, and cake served right there on platters made of leaves.
Interesting. And Diana wasn't alone in her grove, was she? I think she shared it with a couple of other lesser divinities.
That's right. One was Egeria, the nymph of the clear water that cascaded down into the lake.
Okay, Egeria. And the other deity was Verbius, a more complex figure. Legend says he was the youthful Greek hero Hippolytus, brought back to life by the great healer Aesculapius, only for Jupiter to strike down Aesculapius for, meddling with death. Diana then whisked Hippolytus away to Nemi, renamed him Verbius, a kind of forest king. And this is why horses were excluded from the grove, apparently, because horses had caused Hippolytus's death.
That's the story. Some even believe Verbius was the sun, and his worship was overseen by a special priest, the Flamen Verbialis.
Right. And all these details, though they seem maybe disparate, they lead us to the two central questions that our source, the Golden Bough, really sought to answer. First, why did the priest have to slay his predecessor? And second, why, before he slew him, did he have to pluck the Golden Bough? And these questions, they really push us to look beyond Rome entirely. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Because when we begin to look beyond classical antiquity, we find that this combination of royal and priestly duties wasn't unique to Nemi at all. In fact, it was incredibly widespread. Think about the sacrificial king in Rome or the king archon in Athens. Both held religious functions. We find powerful pontiffs ruling sacred slaves in Asia Minor, much like medieval popes and Teutonic high priests, even Chinese emperors offering public sacrifices. It's everywhere.
What's truly striking here, though, is that kings were often revered not just as intercessors or priests, but as themselves gods. They were believed to be able to directly bestow blessings like rain, good crops, and just general well-being upon their subjects. This idea of a divine king, someone able to control nature, that's a really common thread in early human thought.
And this idea that kings could control nature, it seems to spring from a fundamental aspect of the, let's call it the primitive mind, a kind of blurred line between the natural and the supernatural. For early humans, the world wasn't governed by impersonal laws, but by powerful, often unpredictable, supernatural agents, beings with sort of human-like desires. So if you could influence a human, maybe you could influence these agents, and through them, influence nature itself. This foundational belief paved the way for the idea of the man-god, someone who embodied or communed directly with these powers. And there were two primary ways this idea of a man-god seems to have been reached.
Right. The first is through incarnation or inspiration, where a deity actually takes abode in a human, either temporarily or sometimes permanently. This often manifests as divination, prophecy, or, sometimes miracles. For instance, in Mangaya, priests, sometimes called god boxes, would drink this intoxicating liquor to induce a frenzy, and their wild words were just accepted as the voice of the god. And methods to induce this inspiration could be quite intense. Sucking fresh blood, for instance, as seen with the Argos priestess, or southern Indian devil dancers, who would drink the blood of a decapitated goat and then enter a state of spiritual possession, becoming a present deity.
Wow. That's a truly visceral image, isn't it? Connecting the divine to the physical act of drinking blood. But you mentioned other ways to induce inspiration. Were there less, shall we say, messy methods?
Oh, absolutely. In the Hindu Kush, diviners would inhale this thick, pungent smoke from sacred cedar twigs until they were seized with convulsions and fell senseless. Apollo's prophetess, too, apparently ate the sacred laurels before she prophesied. Sometimes, even the sacrificial victims themselves were expected to show signs of inspiration, like convulsive movements or shaking their heads when water was poured on them. And this temporary inspiration could even impart divine power, like the Cambodian chosen man for epidemics, or Apollo at Hyle, who supposedly could impart superhuman strength.
Okay, so that's incarnation inspiration. What's the second way? You said sympathetic magic. How does that work?
Right. Sympathetic magic is basically the belief that you can produce any effect simply by imitating it. You could almost think of it as the earliest, though often misapplied, seed of our modern understanding of cause and effect. For example, if you wanted to harm someone, you'd make an image of them like a doll and then destroy it, believing the person would feel the actual injury.
Okay, like voodoo dolls, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Or Anais, rubbing a wild pig's back with 9 fallen leaves, was thought to make 9 more pigs fall into the hunting pit, just as the leaves fell from the tree. And a Cambodian hunter would apparently strip naked and let himself be caught in his own net, believing it would then magically catch game.
It's fascinating how specific these rituals are. So, for example, in Sumatra, women would sow rice with their hair hanging loose.
Why? So the rice would grow luxuriantly with long stalks, mimicking the hair.
Right, makes sense in that logic. And this belief in magic sympathy even extended to severed body parts, like hair or nails.
Yes, giving anyone who possessed them power over the original owner. It's this incredible web of interconnected belief. Yeah, everything is linked.
Okay, so this belief in sympathetic magic and in these man gods who embodied these powers, it led to all sorts of rituals aimed at controlling the elements, right? Like rainmaking.
Precisely. We see imitation everywhere in rainmaking rituals. Many directly mimicked rain. Russian peasants would drum for thunder and sprinkle water, or Omaha Indians would literally sprit water into the air, hoping to conjure a downpour. Others used symbolic objects, like the Samoans dipping a secret stone in a stream, or the Servian Dodola, a girl clothed entirely in leaves who was drenched with water, representing the spirit of vegetation itself.
And some cultures even tried to, what, coerce or threaten the rain gods. I'm picturing the Chinese parading a paper dragon, and then if no rain came, just cursing it and tearing it to pieces. Is that right?
That's exactly right. It's almost comically defiant, isn't it? You have to admire the sheer
It
audacity.
really speaks to the desperation, I suppose.
It does. Even disturbing sacred springs was a rainmaking strategy. The Dards believed that placing anything impure in certain springs would bring storms, and some West Africans would put a pot of inflammable materials on the fire, threatening to set the sky itself on fire if heaven didn't deliver rain. It's a whole spectrum, from coaxing to outright coercion.
Wow. And it wasn't just rain, was it? They tried to make or control the sun, too.
Oh, yes. The Ojibways would shoot fire-tipped arrows into the air during an eclipse, hoping to rekindle the sun's light. In New Caledonia, a wizard would climb a mountain at sunrise, make a fire, rub a stone, and invoke ancestors to make the sun burning hot and eat up all the clouds.
Incredible. And wind making, too.
Absolutely. The Akut would wave a stone with horsehair wound around it to conjure breeze. Or famously, wizards in places like Finland and the Isle of Lewis would sell wind in knots to sailors, untie one knot for a breeze, two for a gale, and so on.
Amazing. This belief system where humans felt they could directly influence the elements was just pervasive.
It really was, and it leads to a crucial point about these divine kings.
So it's incredible to think of these kings as literal gods controlling the elements. But I mean, what happened if they failed? Was there a divine equivalent of a performance review?
A very severe one indeed. Because they were believed to control crops, weather, and general well-being, if they failed to deliver, they faced some pretty dire punishments. West African kings might be bound and taken to their forefathers' graves to beg for rain. The Banjars would insult and even beat their king if drought or too much rain threatened the crops. And in Lorongo, kings were actually deposed if the harvest failed.
It sounds like an incredibly high-stakes job description. What happened in more extreme cases? Did it get worse than being deposed or beaten?
Oh, much worse. It could escalate much further. Swedish kings, like Domalde and Olaf, were actually sacrificed for good crops during famines. The Chuk chief Kok was stabbed by his own son during a reindeer pestilence because the shamans declared he must be sacrificed to appease the gods. And on the South Pacific island of Neo, kings were apparently killed off in times of scarcity until literally no one would take the throne and the monarchy just ended.
Wow. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, what kind of immense pressure these divine rulers lived under, knowing their very existence depended on the next harvest, the next rainfall.
Exactly. And this points to a fascinating transition in belief. Perhaps at first, the world is seen as a great democracy where everyone possesses some supernatural power. But as knowledge grows, maybe humanity realizes its own smallness, and those powers get increasingly concentrated in a select few, the man-gods. This shifts the focus from simple magic, which anyone might try, to more specialized prayer and sacrifice, which become the domain of priests and kings.
So it's no longer just everyone trying to do magic, but a select few embodying the power. And if they fail,
Yeah.
well, they face the consequences. And this idea extended to great historical empires too, right? Like the Incas.
Yes, the Incas were revered as children of the sun and believed that sickness was a call from their father sun. Mexican kings took an oath to make the sun shine and the earth bring forth fruit. The Chinese emperor was blamed for drought and acted as a high priest in rainmaking ceremonies. Parthian monarchs were styled brothers of the sun and moon and worshipped as deities. And Egyptian kings, too, were deified in their lifetime and could even be blamed for crop failures. The powers ascribed to them were immense.
Okay, this really connects to the bigger picture. We see how the role of the King of the Wood, this royal title, combined with priestly duties, mirrors common features across so many societies, from, barbarian to so-called civilized.
Right. It suggests that even the Nemi priest, despite that really unusual succession role, might have originated from similar beliefs as the sacrificial king in Rome or the king archon in Athens. However, his residence in the grove, rather than a city, and his title King of the Wood, suggests he wasn't a king in the usual political sense, but maybe a departmental king of nature, specifically linked to the Wus themselves.
It's incredible how these ideas about powerful kings connect. But what about the king of the wood specifically? His title, his location? It all just screams of a connection to nature, to trees. Is there a deeper, more ancient belief system that ties into that aspect?
Absolutely. And this brings us very neatly to the deep roots of tree worship. It played a huge part in the religious history of the Aryan race in Europe, it seems. At the dawn of history, Europe was just covered in immense primeval forests. Think of the Hercynian forest, which Caesar said Germans had traveled through for 2 months without reaching the end. Even Rome itself had sacred trees, like the fig tree of Romulus in the Forum, whose drooping supposedly caused public consternation.
So trees weren't just like resources for building or fuel, they were seen as living, animate beings.
Precisely. To the savage mind, as Frazer puts it, trees were animated beings with souls, and they were treated accordingly. The Wanaka in eastern Africa considered the destruction of a coconut tree equivalent to matricide because it gave them life and sustenance like a mother. Siamese monks apparently would not break a branch, seeing it as like breaking an innocent person's arm. Trees were even seen as pregnant sometimes and treated with the same care as expectant mothers in the Moluccas, where clove trees in blossom were kept quiet and in darkness to prevent untimely delivery.
Wow. And just like people, trees were believed to feel pain and bleed.
That's right. An old oak being felled might give shrieks or groans as if the genius, the spirit of the oak, was lamenting. The Ojibways rarely cut living trees, fearing it caused them pain, and if they absolutely had to, they'd apparently beg the tree's pardon first. Sometimes trees were believed to be animated by the souls of the dead, like the Diary tribe in Australia, viewing certain trees as their transformed fathers. And this idea seems to have evolved into the notion of the tree as a dwelling place for a spirit, not just its physical body. So Pelu Islanders would conjure a tree spirit to leave before felling it, and the Padams of Assam would cut trees to make spirits give back lost children they thought were trapped inside.
So the spirit wasn't killed, just dislodged. And rituals were performed to appease these spirits or even offer them new homes.
Exactly, like planting a young tree on a stump in Sumatra, along with betel and coins as compensation. This conceptual shift, where the tree spirit disengages from a particular tree and can take on human form, is potentially where animism starts to morph into polytheism, leading to the idea of broader forest gods like the Roman Sylvanus.
Okay, and these anthropomorphic tree spirits, whether they were thought to be in the trees or maybe embodied in humans, they were believed to wield incredible powers, right?
Yes, absolutely. They could bring rain and sunshine. Lithuanian women believed their sacred groves provided both. They could make crops grow. Mungdaris grove deities were held responsible for the crops. Swedish peasants would stick leafy branches in the furrows when plowing to ensure an abundant crop, or the harvest May, a decked branch or even a whole tree would be brought home from the harvest field to ensure future fertility.
And the power extended beyond crops too, didn't it? You mentioned something about a cedar tree.
Ah, yes, the sacred chili cedar of Gilgit. It was believed to fertilize seeds and multiply herds and even human offspring. Imagine, on their return from collecting cedar sprigs, a man's wife would ask, "What have you brought?" And he would reply, "If you want children, I have brought them to you. If you want food, I have brought it. If you want cattle, I have brought them. Whatever you want, I have it." It's quite potent.
That's incredible. And they could even grant easy delivery during childbirth.
So it was believed.
Yeah.
In Sweden, pregnant women would apparently clasp a special board tread or guardian tree to ensure an easy delivery.
Yeah.
This belief in the tree spirit's fertilizing power clearly underpins so many of these customs. And this is where it gets really interesting for Nemi, because the tree spirit isn't just in the tree. It's often represented by a living person, sometimes dressed in leaves or flowers, and even given titles like king or queen.
Ah, so we see this dual representation again, like the priest and the bough.
Exactly. You see it everywhere in European folk customs. In Bohemia, on the fourth Sunday in Lent, they'd throw a puppet called Death into the water, then bring in a summer puppet, dressed like a woman and fastened to a young tree singing, "We carry death out, we bring summer into the village." In England, children would carry miniature maypoles with a doll called the Lady of the May. These customs, where you have a human figure and a tree or a bough set side by side, they clearly show how the spirit of the tree was thought to be embodied by a person.
Or sometimes the human flesh alone represents the spirit.
Right, like the Russian girls enveloped in birch foliage who were called a poplar, or the little leaf man in Turingen, completely covered in branches, or the famous Jack in the Green in England. These leaf-clad figures, often given royal titles like May King, Whitsuntide King, or Queen of May, they really underscore the creative, far-reaching power attributed to the spirit of vegetation.
And some of these customs are quite striking, aren't they?
They really are. In Corinthia, the Green George, a lad clad entirely in booch branches, would be ducked in water specifically to ensure rain. There was even a custom called the frog-flaying king in Bohemia, where a frog would be pinched until it quacked, then beheaded and flung into the crowd, all seen as a rain charm.
Goodness. And the marriage of vegetation, what was that about?
That was often represented by a king and queen, or lord and lady of May, a symbolic pairing intended to magically make nature productive through imitation.
Okay, so these pervasive European folk customs, with their remarkable persistence and similarity, you're saying they likely reflect really archaic forms of tree worship practiced by the ancient Greeks and Romans.
That's the argument, yes. We can infer this strong connection because the attributes of Diana, the goddess of the Arician Grove, are precisely those of a tree spirit or, sylvan deity. Her sanctuaries were groves, she was associated with the wood god Sylvanus, and she helped women in childbirth, as we saw from the votive offerings. She was even a patroness of wild animals, much like the Finnish wood god Tapio.
And the sacred spring and perpetual fire in her grove really seem to hint at her power to bring rain and sunshine, those elemental forces. Even Verbius, her companion deity at Nemi, was believed by some to be the sun. All these pieces really start to fit together, don't they?
They absolutely do. So when we look again at the King of the Wood, his title, his sacred role, and his home in the grove, not in the city it strongly suggests he was, much like those European May Kings, a living embodiment of the tree spirit. And his life being so intimately tied to that sacred tree through the Golden Bough ritual is, I think, a crucial piece of the puzzle. The Golden Bough itself was probably seen as a very special manifestation of the divine life of the grove.
So the King of the Wood and the Golden Bough were maybe a dual representation of the tree spirit, which, as you've shown, is pretty consistent with how tree spirits are often represented in these folk traditions. And as an incarnate tree spirit, he would naturally be credited with those miraculous powers of sending rain and sunshine, making the crops grow, women bring forth children, and flocks and herds multiply, all powers popularly ascribed to the tree spirit itself.
Precisely. And his importance would likely have extended quite widely. The Arician Grove was a common object of reverence for the whole Latin League, much like, say, the kings of Cambodia sent offerings to the mystic kings of fire and water who lived deep in the forest. From all sides of the Lushan plain, Italian pilgrims would turn their eyes and their steps to the Alban Mountain, home of this mysterious priest of Nemi, the King of the Wood.
And there you have it. From that ghastly, sword-wielding priest of Lake Nemi, we've journeyed through these global patterns of man-gods, the intricacies of sympathetic magic, and the really deeply rooted practices of tree worship. By comparing these seemingly disparate cultures, we've found a compelling and I think probable explanation for that utterly unique and frankly brutal rule of succession at Nemi.
This journey really does reveal not just ancient beliefs, but maybe something more enduring, the human desire to understand and influence the natural world. It's a desire that, over millennia, seems to have evolved from ritual and magic into what we now recognize as science. So maybe the final thought for you to ponder is this. What ancient beliefs or customs do you think still echo, perhaps unrecognized, in our modern lives, shaping the way we see the world today?